TradeSquare is Australia's first business-to-business marketplace connecting people, brands and organisations into this diverse ecosystem in a unique global landscape. Through pivoting, transforming and reshaping, Australian businesses have an opportunity to create the model for the future that aligns with the world's needs and leveraging the power of a collaborative approach. Through the TradeSquare podcast, we will bring together dynamic, diverse and thought-provoking leaders from business, government and organisations to have conversations to further enable new thinking for the future. Welcome to TradeSquare, Australia's leading business-to-business marketplace. I'm Catherine Vandermeulen and joining me today is Sarah Liu, founder of the Dream Collective. How are you, Sarah?
Hi, very well. Thank you so much, Catherine, for having me today.
So tell us, who is Sarah Liu?
So I am the founder and managing director of the Dream Collective. We are a global diversity and inclusion consultancy. I actually started the business in my sort of early mid-20s as a bit of a side hustle passion project with the aim to see more women succeed and lead across corporate Australia. And, you know, within a couple of years, we've actually grown into one of Australia's leading diversity inclusion consultancy. And now, you know, several more years down the track, we are actually now ranked a top 10 global D&I consultancy in all of APAC. So really proud of that.
Wow, well done. So tell us about your original call to adventure to launching the Dream Collective.
So I think for me, it was very much about solving a problem for myself. So I actually come from a background in marketing and branding, and throughout my corporate career journey, as someone who's very ambitious, but I think felt there was a lot of systemic barrier in place for mid-career female talent to succeed in the workplace. I decided to sort of take upon myself to solve that problem. I looked around to see if there are any sort of organizations that helps individuals or organizations to sort of advance women into leadership positions. And I didn't feel any companies sort of resonated with me and what I felt was needed in the market. So yeah, my goal was to actually solve that problem for myself as a starting point, and then it evolved into a bit of a side hustle, and then now, you know, a global business. So I think sometimes you just gotta focus on the problem to solve, and the rest will fall into place.
So obviously over the last 12 months, we're living in a very different world. How have you seen Australian businesses really adding value to the world and the businesses that you work with?
So I think the last 12 months, if I'm completely honest, I think Australian business can probably do more with sort of helping other businesses and helping other markets, in the sense that we are in I think because the way the pandemic was managed, you know, here locally in Australia, we actually had the economic recovery, etc., actually happened for us relatively quickly compared to other markets. But I'm not quite sure if we necessarily assumed that leadership role and assumed that opportunity to be market leading. I mean, 80% of our business comes from international markets, and we work with global brands as well. So I feel there's probably an opportunity that can still be capitalized on as Australian businesses to sort of help using this fast recovery that we have, this you know, relatively more stable economic climate that we have, to actually be more of a market and a thought leader.
And I guess about being more proactive in that approach to some of those key opportunities.
Yes, exactly. And I think Australian businesses, I think that's part of what I've observed sort of culturally as well. There's quite a lot of a sort of protective mindset. So it's about me protecting my business, or, you know, my livelihood, my profession, my job, my company during this time, which I think is fair enough. You know, you need to think about that, you know, but I think we need to move beyond that self-preservation mindset and that phase as a business and as a nation. Now that we are on a positive trajectory to recovery, in fact, have actually gotten ahead of the curve, from a global perspective. How can we be more proactive and more creative? And I think actually start thinking about more than ourselves. So really shifting that mindset from how do we protect and preserve ourselves into how do we actually lead the world.
Love it. And something that you are really passionate about is driving more women in leadership. Why is this something that is so important to you?
For me, it started as a personal ambition that wanted to be realized, coming from my background, and I've had in my sort of corporate career before starting the Dream Collective, I've had people tell me, recruiters, business leaders telling me that as an Asian woman, who's also really young at that point in time, wanting to make my mark in corporate Australia, I just actually need to really regulate and manage my own expectation, because there's a reality of what I can or cannot achieve as a young Asian woman in Australia. And that was actually just not helpful for me, So I think it started as a personal realization that, there is a barrier, there's a recognition of that. But then the more and more I got into this space, the more you learn about it, the more you realize that it's a systemic barrier. And so that's why, the book Stop Fixing Women by Catherine Fox, I actually think it summarized everything really well. That when we talk about women in leadership, historically and traditionally, the conversation has been around like fixing the women, like make sure women behave more like this, do more of this, do less of that. But really, the more you got into it, the more you realize that in order to see more women in leadership, we first need to fix the system. There's a lot of structural issues and biases and barriers in place for women. So the more you learn, I think the more enlightened I became, and the more that became, I suppose, this is like a lifelong mission to make sure that we address the structural barriers that are there. We change the system so that we can see more women rise up to leadership.
Can you share a little bit more about the system that actually needs to be fixed and what some of the steps are that are needing to be taken to fix that?
So, I mean, the first one, which is the easy one, is like hiring, right? So, as humans, we are wired to, like and prefer people who are more similar to us. So that's what we call the affinity bias, and when the decision makers, the hiring panels, the leadership team that's actually making decision about your next executive hire, the likelihood is that they will gravitate towards someone who are like them, who also went to that private boys school, who was also on the soccer team, and who has similar life experiences, because you can connect with them on that level. And I think we need to firstly recognize that is there, acknowledge that everybody has them, both men and women actually have those biases. But what that does is that it plays into structural biases, and therefore it means that the job description we write, they are less welcoming, for women, or diverse talent in that case. And the way we structure our interviews, the way we evaluate, culture fit versus culture add, and the way we define success, and the way we define what good leaders look like, that all that affinity bias plays into it and becomes a structural and systemic measure that we're trying to uphold. So, I mean, that is just a really small and simple example of how that plays into the decision making of what our leadership team actually looks like.
You mentioned about what a good leader looks like. How do you describe a good leader now and for the future?
That's a really interesting question, because I'm not necessarily sure if leadership and strong leadership necessarily change over time. And I think that's something that I'm actually still sort of observing and sort of learning. I feel that from what I've seen, good leaders and bad leaders, what they were like 50 years ago versus where they are today, they're not necessarily different. So I suppose, outlook is that what defines a good leader in the future will continue to be the same. But I think the biggest difference, and I think the turning point I've seen in the market, is that I think previously good leaders are perceived as someone who's really good at their job, who are exceptional in delivering results, outcomes, having superior knowledge, expertise, who can, that really sort of, that's superior to anyone else that they lead. What I'm seeing more and more now in terms of what people are looking for in their leaders is actually someone who's almost like a personal coach, who actually cares about your growth, who cares about your well-being, who might not be the top subject matter expert that you will come across, but who's more holistic in their approach and how they lead the business and lead people who follow them. And so that's probably the biggest differentiating factor that I've started seeing in the market.
And so, thinking about people in organizations now, how have resilient, dynamic, and resourceful individuals really played a key role in working towards transforming Australian businesses?
Great question, because I think those words are probably not used frequently enough in when we think about how do we, and the kind of talent that we want to attract, retain, and actually advance in corporate Australia. So I think if you look at just even taking the last 12 months as an example, people who are dynamic and adaptable and are resourceful, and resourceful meaning like literally creating something out of nothing, finding connections and opportunities when there's none, which is exactly what we experienced during the pandemic. What can you do when there is actually a global shutdown, of, economy and the marketplace, etc. People's ability to pivot, who are dynamic in understanding the different dynamics of each market and different ecosystems, online, offline, etc., and who are resourceful in finding opportunities and creating those, are actually people who are now succeeding that we see 12 months on. So I think, in terms of what the corporate Australia, what the business world needs to actually be looking for, is less about the traditional definition of good leaders, the sort of qualification experiences, is actually looking at people who can adapt under any circumstances, who can create something out of nothing, who can spot opportunities, connections, and create those opportunities when they're not presented to them. So I think, especially in Australia, to be honest, I think we've come from a very comfortable environment, right? We've very well resourced as a nation. So we are not, I suppose, as creative and dynamic compared to other markets. And I think we need to understand this potential shortcoming and acknowledge that, and looking for ways to bridge it by actually accelerating, attracting, and promoting people who might not be traditionally perceived as strong leaders, like outspoken and assertive, etc., but looking for who are the talent who can actually spot those opportunities, who are making creative connections and links, and who understand what it means to be adaptable and resourceful to lead in the next century.
And so for you, what are some of the next key steps that really enable businesses to create a diverse and inclusive culture that reflects their vision?
I think a couple of things that companies firstly need to acknowledge, address, is that diversity and inclusion is not this separate thing that you do anymore. Diversity and inclusion has become a cost of entry for any business to operate. This is what your employees expect. This is what your stakeholders, shareholders expect. This is what your customer base expect of you. So I think the first next step is almost start realizing and acknowledging that this is not a separate HR initiative that you run, like every International Women's Day, once a year kind of thing. It needs to be something that's entrenched into every thing that you do. And practically what that means looks like is, looking at the hiring. How do you actually hire diverse talent through building an inclusive hiring practice, right? And then you look at training. Are your staff equipped and trained around diversity, inclusion, and equity? How is this not a ad hoc, nice to have initiative, but actually becomes part of the culture? So through training. And then you look at promoting. So how are you as a business celebrating, promoting, and I suppose incentivizing certain behaviors? Are you accelerating and promoting inclusive leaders, or are you actually promoting leaders who might be good at their job, but actually does not exhibit any of those inclusive behavior and does not even is not even aware of the value of diversity? Or are you actually promoting people who are invested in building a diverse team and really understanding the value and the innovation, the commercial value it will bring to the business? So, hiring, promoting, training are three, immediate, easy next steps for business leaders to consider.
And what is a key message that you are passionate about, that you are advocating and championing through your work at the Dream Collective?
I think one key thing that we're really championing is around challenging the status quo, but taking it one step further. If you think about the progress that's actually being made in this world, progress have only been made because people refuse to accept the status quo. So I feel that we need to actually come at it, something like an ethos across our organization is that we want to challenge with a sense of urgency, So if we want to see corporate Australia, if you want to see your company and businesses achieving results that you've never seen before, then we got to actually do things that we've never done before. Accelerate and create urgency in how you hire and how you promote diverse talent within your organization. Accelerate how you create and embed and mandate an inclusive behavior and inclusive culture in your organization, because diversity is actually the prerequisite for innovation. So unless we can do that and do that right in terms of building a diverse and inclusive team in our organization, innovation and ultimate commercial success will be very limited.
And so within the Dream Collective office at the moment, what are some of the hot topics that you're getting excited
something
about?
that we're getting really excited about is the, I suppose, rollout of male ally programs. So instead of traditional approach of just looking at, female talent, female leadership acceleration, programs, which, I think do have their roles and are important. What's equally, if not more important, is actually equipping male allies, helping them understand, seeing beyond their blind spots, and understanding, privilege, equity, and so that they are no longer apathetic, but they are actually they become advocates in the whole diversity and inclusion discussion and action plan. So we're excited about the introduction and the rollout of male ally program and trainings, but then also something that we're really excited about potentially rolling out is reverse mentoring program, but for men. Because so much of what we need to be doing is, once again, building awareness and educate and bring men on the journey with us. So, that reverse mentoring program, but having men being part of that learning experience, having women actually mentoring men around what it means, about the challenges facing women, the invisible barriers facing women structurally in the workplace, I believe is going to be a really important turning point for us.
And so finally, Sarah, TradeSquare has really been focused on celebrating women for International Women's Day over the last month, and around the theme of choosing to challenge and leading towards women in leadership. How do you choose to challenge in your organization and the impact that you're having in your world?
I think choose to challenge, that the theme this year deeply resonated with us because that's actually, as I mentioned before, like a key ethos in our organization. We choose to challenge actually by working in some of the hardest segment and sector to break into, which is technology sector. So I would say probably about 70 to 80% of the work that we do are actually in the tech sector. And we choose to challenge by actually breaking into incredibly difficult markets like Japan, and we choose to challenge by taking on daunting tasks like training 200 Japanese senior male directors around diversity and inclusion, which is something that is pretty unprecedented in the market, So I think we choose to challenge in making a decision to not just do the easy work, but actually do the kind of work that will see long-term impact.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah from the Dream Collective, for sharing your wisdom with us
Thank you,
on
Catherine.
TradeSquare. For more information on TradeSquare, head to www.tradesquare.com.au and support Australian business economic recovery and growth with a collaborative approach to the future of business.